Thank you so much for having me. It's an amazing conference to be at. I'm Rosie, and for the next 15 minutes, I will go through 5 ways to improve monetization for mobile apps. So, as growth people, we get super excited about acquisition. This is a study done by Profitwell of 10,000 growth articles online, and they found that 7 out of 10 are about acquisition, 2 out of 10 are out of retention, and 1 out of 10 are on monetization. But what the reality is our budgets are shrinking, we don't have as much money, budgets are tight, and the research actually shows that improving monetization has 4 times impact of improving on growth than acquisition. So this was also a study by Profitwell, and they took a 1% improvement in monetization and compared it to a 1% improvement in acquisition and found that you grew 4 times more if you focused on monetization. So it's a huge lever. People don't often move it. I wonder why. I feel like it's a bit scarier than acquisition potentially, but it's one that investors really love, right? It completely links to LTV, profitability, and right now it's super, super important. So over the past 5 years in consulting and startups, I've found that moving just tiny things can have massive impact. So we've had 150% increase in average revenue per user. We've had conversion to trial go from 2% to 14%. And a combination of all those things together, we've had 3x revenue quarter on quarter. So it's a huge lever. People don't talk about it enough. And that's what we're chatting about today. So I'm Rosie. Past 5 years, I've been working in consulting and startups. I started at What 3 Words, and then moved on into Femtech, not fintech. So for the past 3 years, I've been in B2C subscription apps, and what I have distilled that into is 5 concrete lessons to increase revenue across pricing, conversion, and segmentation. So you'll be able to take away some things to test, some new ideas to try, and there's also some resources at the end if you would like to learn more. So, lesson number 1, find the area of highest impact. This is so simple, but so important. I've spent a whole quarter working on the wrong part of the funnel. And we've all had this. Your founder suddenly turns around to you and says, we need to make more money. It might be that you're trying to make profitability. It might be that you've got an investor deck you need to input into. I've had this at every single place I've worked at. The first thing that you need to be saying is, okay, well, where should we focus? And I'm going to do a really quick exercise to help. So, number 1, map out your funnel. This is super simple. Install, subscription, renewal. Then what you need to do is go find some benchmarks. So these are the ones that I use for habit-forming apps. We've got install to free trial to subscription, and subscription renewals. These come from personal experience. There was a recent Apple webinar as well, and there's an amazing revenue cap report if you haven't already seen it. The 2 key things about benchmarks that's super, super important. One is that they're specific for industry. So you need to make sure that you're looking at the right benchmarks for your product. The second one is they do change. So in the recent Apple webinar, apparently, free trial to subscription has massively decreased after COVID. People don't have the money to spend on 30 different subscriptions, so they're canceling. So get your benchmarks. Next, add in your actuals to your funnel. You might have 5% install to subscription and 50% renewal, and then a revenue per user of 10, let's say. Then identify your weak spots. You'll notice that I haven't highlighted 50%. 50% is pretty good. It could be better. But over the past 3 years, the one key thing that I've learned is that the earlier in the funnel that you work, the much more likely you are to increase revenue. Why? Well, a lot of people who are canceling and who aren't renewing, they just won't have activated properly in the first place. So your problem is way upstream. Maybe they didn't get to the core moment. Maybe they accidentally subscribed. If you're working on renewals, you're kind of too late. So you kind of need to work earlier. And time again, I found that the earlier, the better. So that's one rule. After you've identified your weak spots, what I love to do is get out a Google Sheet and then just work out what will happen if we move these different levers. So let's say install to first purchase, you want to move that %. How much revenue could you see from that? If you want to work on renewals, how much revenue could you see from that? And then my favorite thing is a difficulty column to work out, okay, how hard do I think these things are? Ask around other growth managers, other product managers, peers, work out if people know how to move these things. Once you've done this, you can then pick. So here I would pick the second one. Let's try and get install to first purchase from 6 to 8%. We might see a revenue lift of 33%, and it's hard, but it's not as hard as working on renewals. So to summarize lesson 1, map out your funnel, add your latest benchmarks, pick your weakest areas, forecast some scenarios, and then pick a focus and start testing. Lesson 2, don't price too cheap. This has happened every single place I have been. Most startups are like, we're just going to put a price out there. We don't have time. We're just going to see how it goes. We don't have time for loads of research. This happened to me at Furley. Furley is a sex therapy app for women, and 1 hour of sex therapy is around £100. Sometimes it's £200. We threw a price out there. Yeah, we did some competitive research. We saw what others were doing. But we did £35 for a year as the first price. And we lowballed ourselves so badly because I think there's a bit of an anxiety when you're monetizing a product for the first time. You're like, I don't know if anyone's going to buy this. I'm going to put it out really cheap just in case no one buys it. And you're essentially wasting a lot of time when you could be earning way more. So the reality is it actually only takes a couple of weeks to get some pricing insights from user research. And I wish I'd done this so much earlier. So where do you start? Obviously with customers. Ask some willingness to pay questions or Van Westendorp pricing questions. Things like, what's so cheap that you'd be suspicious about buying this product? What's a good deal? What's an expensive price but you'd probably pay? What's a stupidly expensive price that you wouldn't pay for? And then you can layer in some other questions about competitors, as well as ranking some features. So if you want to know what you should put in your subscription in a survey, you could say, hey, here's a list of features. Please can you rank these in nice to have, don't need this. Ideally, you'd survey around 100 to 200 customers. And if you want to dig into the whys, then obviously some user research, maybe about 5 users. Once you've got your survey results, you can then find your thresholds. So this is a Van Westendorp pricing model. And essentially, the more expensive you get, this way, the purple and blue lines, the more expensive, the higher percentage of people think it's expensive and too expensive. At the other end of the scale, the orange and the green, the cheaper you get, the higher percentage of people think it's too cheap or a good deal. The ideal price range is in the middle. So if you send this survey, super easy, use a type form, send it out via email, at least you get some thresholds of what's way too cheap, what's way too expensive, and you can avoid lowballing yourself. So survey your users, find your pricing thresholds, and experiment within that range to make sure you're not leaving money all over the place. Lesson 3, don't price once. This is another super common one. So most companies monetize, and then they just don't revisit their pricing later or ever. But what the research shows is half of companies that change price see a 25% increase in annual recurring revenue. So this was a research done by OpenView with a few thousand SaaS companies. But I think the key thing is, it's a lever people are scared to touch, but when you do touch it, it makes a massive difference. As a general rule, revisit your pricing every 6 months or so. You should see it like any feature, anything that you're doing, any new channel, pricing's the same. You should always be revisiting it. And when you do revisit your pricing, you should watch out for a few trade-offs. The first one is that price changes are super easy. They can be done in the app and Play Store. You don't even need engineers. But it's not an A/B test when you do that. So when you do a pricing test, make sure you don't change marketing or product in any significant way during the period, so you're much better at comparing before and after your pricing change. The last thing is keep an eye on the relationship between key metrics. So if you increase your price, your average revenue per user is going to go up. But every single time I've increased price, conversion rate has gone down. That's not a bad thing. It's nothing to worry about, as long as your lifetime value has gone up. And we'll talk about how you can fix the conversion to purchase later. This is something we learned at Peanut last year. So we did a number of price tests across different markets, and they took days to execute, not weeks. We had 40% quarter-on-quarter revenue, and price changes was one of the big factors that contributed to that. Lesson 4, segment your users. If you only offer one plan, you're missing out on lots of money. We're going to do a quick segmentation exercise. You'll notice I love little exercises. So first, let's just put some user cohorts on a graph. We've got power payers. People are on your subscription. They're super happy with it. They're going to renew. You have your average payers. They're paying for it. They might churn. You never know. And then you got your unlikely payers. People are like, I'm not going to pay for that product. Why should I pay for that? So if we put the simple flow on the graph, install, subscription, renewal, and then let's take a look at the unlikely payers. What can you do to get them to pay? The easiest, most simple, most well-known product-led growth tactic is a free trial. They're not going to pay you straight away, offer it for free, and then we'll see if they subscribe later. Let's look at our really unlikely payers. Maybe they don't want a free trial, but they would pay for a cheaper tier that maybe has less in it. And this is really interesting because you see when you increase price and your conversion goes down, you obviously have a group of people who are happy to pay for a cheaper thing that you lost when you increased your price. So how we get those users is you offer another subscription tier that is cheaper, has less in it, but it's something that they're willing to pay for. And the really, really unlikely payers, discounts. So I've seen some brands offer an annual subscription for £1, and that is targeted at the people who are so unlikely to pay, you just want to get a tiny thing out of them. Then let's look at the power payers. So they bought in, they love the product. Could you give them something that would make them love it even more? Like, what do they want? Can you give them more of that thing? So you can have a larger tier that's more expensive, and would they pay for that? Then you've got the superpower payers. And what is it that they want? Would they pay for something over and over again because they love it and they keep using it and getting value out of it? And would they do that again and again? A really good example of this is Tinder. So there's a great interview with the old chief product officer at Tinder, Ravi Mehta. And Tinder's monetization strategy, they've got 2 tiers of subscription, and then they've got a number of different one-off payments in the app. They did some research, and they found that they had these users, which they call whale users. So they were a very small percentage of the audience, less than 10%, like a single-digit percentage point, but they had 10x the average revenue per user compared to the average. So $300 in a month versus $30. And so Tinder were like, wow, what are these people doing? And it turned out that they were paying and paying and paying for super likes and for boosts. When they did some user research and focus groups, they kind of dug into these whales, and they found out that these were people who were traveling. When they got to an area, they really just wanted a date. So they were happy to throw money at Tinder until they could get this date. And I think it just shows you that if you have one tier, you're missing out on your power payers, your superpower payers. You're missing out on your unlikely payers, your really unlikely payers. So if you only have one tier, you're essentially leaving money all over the place. Last lesson, lesson 5. Keep it simple for new users. So that whole beautiful flow diagram that I spent ages making, completely hide that. Hide that from new users. They don't need to see all your tiers. They don't need to know what every single thing that you have. The most important thing for a new user is that they can get to your magic moment, and you don't want to be hitting them with loads of different monetization screens before they've got there. There's a balance between activation and monetization, and you need to make sure that you're not risking churn because you're like, we need to make loads of money, therefore, let's prioritize business needs over customer needs. A great example is Bumble. So if you are a new user with Bumble, you go through onboarding, tutorial, and then you swipe through 5 profiles before you even know that you can pay for Bumble. And the first time that I understood that I could pay for Bumble is the screen on the left. It's very simple, 3 points, find exactly what you're looking for. If I dig in to the product and I go into my profile, there's actually a load of complexity around Bumble's monetization. They've got 2 tiers, they've got tens of things in different tiers, you can pay for this, that, the other. It's very complicated. And as you keep going with Bumble and get deeper into the user experience, you're then hit with all these different things at the right time. The key thing here is you're progressively disclosing the complexity, so you don't want other users who aren't going to pay you to churn. I wrote about this, there's more detail, you can check it out on Medium. So, 3 things if you want to keep learning about monetization. These are my 3 favorite resources. The first is a podcast, one of Lenny's podcast episodes called How to Price Your Product by Naomi Ionita. She's a VC. She's amazing. I love it. The second one is a book called Monetizing Innovation by Madhavan Ramanujam, and it covers pricing, segmentation. It's literally like the Bible for monetization. And then you can also, Medium is a wonderful resource. You can find me writing on Medium about monetization. So, 5 lessons in a nutshell. Number 1, find the area of highest impact. It's the most important one. Number 2, don't price too cheap. Number 3, don't price once. Number 4, monetize for different user cohorts. And number 5, keep it simple for new users. If you're going to take away one thing, it's that don't underestimate monetization. It is a super important lever. It's not just price. It's price, activation, onboarding. It's segmentation. It's messaging, CRM. You can monetize loads. There's so much more to monetization than just price. And I know it's scary to manage people's money and to test with that. But ultimately, you need to work out what is the right value, what will people pay for, and how can we maximize that for business. That is it. Thank you very much.